The next presenter is, this is quite confusing, he's doing a project for a company in Australia. He sounds Australian, but is actually Irish. He's working for Nottingham Trent University in England. So please welcome Vince Hackett.
Okay, thank you everybody. We're just having a discussion about future heroes. Can you hear me? We're just having a discussion about future heroes, and I hope here we have some of the future heroes. There's my son, he's doing civil engineering, and my grandson who wants to get into construction for some reason. They do at that age. So we might see them in a couple of years' time. Oh, yeah. So we're talking about, and I think it's quite relevant after the previous presentation, designing lean thinking, and this was on the implementation of lean construction and the refurbishment of an LNG plant in Western Australia. I will just describe that, look at the agenda. What I want to do is just look at the construction description, just put that into context. The research aim and finding, there's more than one findings. The tools we use and the development of those tools, and that was kind of key, the way they developed, and the evolution of the tools, which was something I hadn't expected to see. It didn't involve the philosophy or the concepts, but the tools were developed by the people using them as they engage with the process. And also this use of tools for knowledge management and learning. Have a look at that. So the research spent 17 months to fly in, fly out, so I was there for about 6 visits, 10 weeks at a time, and I'd probably be home for about 5 weeks in the UK. This is the Hackett gas plant. It's located in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. It was built about in 1986. The first train there was LNG-1, constructed in 86, and then the last train was constructed about 10 years ago. And then on the left-hand side, we've got the dom gas trains, which supply gas to the domestic market. These trains are coming to the end of the design life. They're only designed for 25 years, but the joint venture is made up of Woodside. You'll find out who they are. They are the owner, one of the operators, and they own it, or they are the operator, and they own, or part owner also, Chevron, BHP, Billiton, BP, Exxon, and BB, which are a Japanese joint venture. So all the great and good are involved in this. So they want to continue to refurb this plant over the next 10 years, spending about $1 billion every year to get it to last until 2040. This was a stick-built plant. Stick-built means it was built in situ. But because of the issues Australians have with productivity, the construction has evolved to the point, not in this plant, but in plants that are being constructed in Australia, where they're using modular systems. So modular systems means that the plant is essentially built in Thailand, Korea, or the modules they are transported to the sites in Australia, and then they're put together like Lego. It's evolved to the point that we see here now, and this is the biggest module that has been produced so far. This is a big beast here, 5,500 tons. It went out in November 2014, last year, and this has gone to Darwin in Queensland. But the issue is, it's still serious, and we look at this, there's serious issues with productivity in Australia. So to mitigate against that, the technology has evolved to the point where they're going on to FLNG, which is floating LNG plants. And you could say this is a burning platform. This has been constructed in Korea at the moment. We've just finished the superstructure. It's supposed to go on stream in 2017. It's the largest floating structure ever constructed, and it's nearly a half kilometre long. I would say this is not a good place to be. If these are having issues with this, it is having cost overruns, but I would suggest that this is the technology to go to. All the work will get sucked out of Australia. We've got some really good guys in the industry, but everything will go offshore. And how do we mitigate against that? What can we do? If we look at the 8 wastes, traditionally we said there were 7 wastes. If we look at ONO and WOMAC. But I would suggest, and then of course there's a recognition that there's the 8 waste, but I call it the first waste. And it's probably the most, and it's not probably, it is the most important waste. It's the underutilisation of people potential. And this is what the research looked at. So if we look at people potential, we're looking at their knowledge. How do we leverage that? Skills and ability to plan and achieve. If we can't mobilise the potential of our people, of our workforce, our designers, of the people that do the work, you can forget about the other ways. So the research aim was the sustainable embedment of a lean approach by obtaining engagement from the workforce. What I mean by the workforce is not just the blue-collar workers, it's the supervision, superintendents, managers, project engineers, project managers, but specifically the workforce and the supervision. So there were early barriers to implementing the strategy. Go out to Australia and you're telling people you're implementing lean and they just look at you. Yeah, right, mate, as they say. So there was the existing understanding of planning by the workforce. And this was quite a revelation in that a lot of the guys, a lot of the supervisors couldn't plan or couldn't use a schedule. And there's reasons for that. One, it was highly complex, the schedules that were produced. 2, they'd never been trained. People had assumed that they could read plans. These are really good guys. These are top of the range, hugely experienced, highly intelligent people. But people are just making an assumption that these supervisors can read schedules. A lot of them couldn't, 80% couldn't, which is quite a revelation. There was also this perception that time spent planning by supervision is wasted time. This went across the board. Why should they be planning? Should be out doing. But now like headless chickens, guys. You're better off doing that than taking an hour out a week planning, which is interesting. I mentioned this before, this idea of buy-in from middle management, the sticky middle. If we couldn't engage middle management, could easily engage the workforce, senior management, they were up for it, but middle management was an issue and you really had to engage and work hard on that. Also, there was a multitude of consultants implementing lean. So we had McKinsey's, all the big beasts in the jungle, implementing lean, what I call lean, and other efficiency initiatives. So they're badging it as lean, but it wasn't lean. And that was really a big barrier to come up against. So we're talking serious money been spent, millions been spent, and I would suggest the outcomes were less than satisfactory. But that was certainly a big blocker. Another one, and you might find this a bit strange, they had a big cottage industry in the company with implementing ongoing CI initiatives. A lot of them were very good. They implemented 5S, brilliant. We used RFID tagging, which you use as part of the research. But the issue was 2 things. First of all, it has to be a sustainable implementation. You can get a continuous improvement, but if you don't sustain the implementation, people lose interest. Also, it has to align with the aims of the company. What is their value proposition? And are we implementing lean in line with that? So the early findings, the barriers were, one of the key barriers was the buy-in from middle management. Big barrier was the use of CPM as planning tool. We're using CPM as their value method, so it's a cost paradigm. So we're looking at cost instead of flow, and it was really disruptive into trying to get any sort of a planning approach, lean, implemented. So the enablers, this is interesting, was the evolution of the tools to suit the environment. We didn't change the philosophies, we didn't change the concepts, but the guys changed the ways. Once we got engagement, and took a long time, and commitment and trust, they would evolve the tools to suit. It also was, if you could, we're talking about this ability of people to learn, and people want to learn. If you can learn as part of your job, we can use tools to enable people to continue to develop innovation. That's their innovation. It's not something that's pushed on them. They plan it, they own it, and they want it. Also found that there was a lot of pre-existing knowledge of lean type approaches. So some people had done lean production because we're looking at mechanical inlets, that kind of thing. But some people where, for instance, where you do pull planning with the post-its, and some of the guys, some of the superintendents go, yeah, I've seen that before, we've used that before, something similar. Once people said that, then you got a lock in. You've got people really engaged. So this was some of that, and you come across this everywhere. We've tried it. It won't work here. It certainly wouldn't work there. And so we're doing things well, not particularly doing things well, but they're making a lot of money. So why change? This is an interesting statistic. McKinsey's have produced this. It's about true. The productivity in Australia is 20 to 30% below similar plants in North America. And why is this? Because these guys, women, are superb at what they do. If you're not good, you don't survive there. And they're really experienced, can do the business, they know what they're doing. So what's going on? Probably people have seen this graph before, or these pie charts. And I think if we're getting value added in current production, that's about where we're getting there, 10%. So every hour in the day was over 10 hours, was probably doing work that was of value, that was progressing the job on to where it wanted to be. Like as I said, they had a lot of consultants and been here for the last 10, 20 years, God knows how long. And I just compared, got some data they produced, just looked at LNG, LNG2, which is one of the Train 2, Train 1, similar types of work, and cladding. So in 2013, tool time, what they call tool time is work that the blue collar, or time that the blue collar workers spend on the work phase. Not particularly that they're doing anything, right? They may be throwing spanners in the work, but at least they're there. But despite all the initiatives they had, it didn't really raise tool time much 18 months later. Tool time could vary from 20 to 60%. And then you can see all the waste. So we look at what kind of tools you might use to address these issues, waste. Lean logistics, won't really talk about that, but they did use RFID tagging, which was quite good. We could employ it as a lean tool, or certainly help. Last planner system goes across the board. Something else that you really want to discuss is work design. So we've got tool time of 40 to 60%. How do we make that tool time more effective? So how do we design the work to be more efficient before we do that work? So we're designing productivity into the work before we start it. As I said, I spent 17 months, and it was certainly not a linear approach or journey. I mean, there were a lot of setbacks. Obviously, we had a lot of barriers. You got consultants, big beasts of the jungle in there, and I wasn't a big beast. I was probably a wildebeest on the Serengeti plain. But first of all, you had to identify, and you found out as you were, and this you had to work your way to explicate what you needed to do. First of all was to identify and engage informal leaders. So the informal leaders were the people who, they may be supervisors, superintendents. These were the guys that if you didn't engage, they made the decisions. You need to engage these people and identify them. You need to get buy-in at all levels, and particularly in middle management. You also need to get engagement from EPCM contractors, clients, the CIs, which are the subcontractors, across the board, and really work on that. So there's a lot of work of getting people involved and talking to people. Early informal discussions using a standard message, and we look at what the standard message was, because we talk about this use of language, so it had to be a common language that people understood. Organised workshops with management and supervision. Key was negotiating time slots, because we said this, mentioned this, that time spent planning was wasted time. So you really had to work hard to negotiate a time slot for your meetings and stick to that. Disciplined approach that people had to turn up with the last planners. They had to be pre-populated, turn up in time. If they didn't turn up, cancel the meeting and start again. So that would be this disciplined approach. And continually coach, because if you didn't do that, you find you had people churning people in. People forgot what the message was, so continually coach your people. And also this coaching and support among team leaders, team members. So we had to look at the synergy of the teams. Some teams would consist of people that were quite gregarious and outgoing, the informal leaders. Some people were a bit more reflective and they didn't want to engage. But once you got that synergy and people talking, then working together and collaborating, then things evolved and took off. So this is just typical. So if what I found was sometimes wasn't getting the standard message across. So for each, say the last planner, just develop a sheet, do a hard copy of it, give that out to the guys when we're doing the workshops, run the last planner, so people had a heads up on what exactly was involved. So for instance, some people didn't realise after all the talk that the last planners are the field supervisors. You know, it requires engagement, trust and commitment. The idea of constraints, this idea of language, what do you mean by constraints? You know, and it's a common language, and making work ready. And this is the idea of working collaboratively. So really get that message across and get that clear message across to people. So the tools we implemented, it was the last planner system, which is a system, daily huddle, crew-based planning, and pull planning 5S. We also used this, what we call virtual first run informed work design, so developing work design, standard work approaches. So we use this just to inform what we're doing. Looking at the master schedule, it's just here using, but we found it's really difficult to use the master schedule. We had to actually just use milestones to inform the pull planning sessions, which in turn looked at constraint analysis. But we did more than just look at constraint analysis. We were looking at opportunity realization as well, and codifying explicit knowledge that resided in the workforce, which then goes on to inform your weekly planning. And then metrics is key, being able to gather those metrics, particularly the PPCs. Okay, so this is the daily huddle, and this is where I'm saying we got some evolution in what we're doing. This is shut down and called DOMGAS 2. You see that? It's 30 days long, so we work days and nights on this. And there's some key points about the evolution. So what we had was, before we started doing the daily huddle, people tended to turn up maybe up to an hour late on the job, because of all sorts of reasons. It's 200, 400 acre sites, so you can get lost anywhere on that. So what this did was set the time that people arrived at the workplace to the minute. It was also a forum for transfer of information. What we found when we looked further is that it wasn't just a schedule that the information was being transferred on, it was also quality, and there's also health and safety issues. So this became a really must attend event. So if you wanted to know how, we did this twice a day on the shuts in mornings and nights. If you wanted to know what was happening on the upcoming day, you attended this, because people just discuss what they're doing. Quick 5 minutes. This is what we're doing. This is the simultaneous operations. I can help you, mate, here. I've got scaffolders. I'll sort you out. You help me out later on. So people understood the flow of the work. We'd also get the health and safety guys dropping in and QA guys dropping in if they felt they had to get a message out. So that was this evolution of practice. So we evolved this daily huddle on further, and actually this was a continuous improvement initiative. So what we do is what we did in the morning, so what people started doing in the mornings previously that have spent a half an hour doing the health and safety pre-start up at the top. People are already late coming down, so we combined health and safety talk, quality talk, and the scheduling discussion. Populated with the last planner sheet, so we knew what we were working to. This is very important, people making daily commitments and how people would commit to what they were going to do in front of their peers. So it's different than McKinsey approach, I'm going to use them, where it's a command and control and you're telling people what to do. You're doing this, mate, you've got to hit this target, and people go, yeah, right, and they never hit it. So people were committing in front of their peers, and when you commit in front of your peers, that's a very powerful conversation. People thought it was a bit of a joke in the beginning, but when you've said, I'm going to do 80% there on the first, where am I going now? Nice to see if people are awake. So there they'd say what they were going to do on the day, going to do 90%, 100%, and then record what they'd done on the previous day. But because you made that commitment to your peers, you had to stick to that commitment. and people would stretch themselves. And then we'd also have the constraint. We'd have the constraints then, which had been identified by the last planner. So it's quite a condensed way of doing things. Also seen evolution in the last planner sheet. We didn't use an IT system because we felt that this idea of boundary objects where the actual sheet becomes very powerful, where people can touch and use the sheet, they write on that sheet, and it becomes very personal to them. This was a really good evolution, but you could see one point here, the reasons for non-performance. They were getting 75–80% PPCs, but they didn't want to populate the reasons for non-performance. And the reason for that was because people felt they get the blame if they identified reasons for non-performance. And the message you had to get across was, this is gold, boys. If we can get that 20%, understand what's stopping us from getting 100%, that's where we need to be. This is one we just produced just before I left. This was the inspectors. They were not an interrelated group, so I didn't have to populate who was responsible. But what they were starting to do really well was this reasons for non-performance. And they're doing even more. They're coming up with ideas as to how they could improve and how they could evolve and change. But this took 17 months. And you only got that when people trusted what you were doing, that they trusted that it wasn't going to be used against them, taken down and held in evidence against them. So we started getting, initially on the PPCs, we were getting 100% on the shuts, which means people were totally under commission. Once we got up and running, we were getting about 80%. This is Dom Gas. This was the shutdown. It was 8 days, so 16 shifts, day and night. We managed to get about 80%, and we improved productivity about 25–30%, being conservative. Measured productivity by what time we could cut out of the shut, so we took 4 or 5 shifts out of the shut, which is a big achievement. I found that across the board when we started getting consistent trends on the PPCs, we were getting some of the order 20–30% on an 80% PPC. So it finally took a long time to get the pull planning in place. I only got it in place this year. And there was a good reason for that, because to do the pull planning, Karratha is located up in the northwest territories of Australia. Head office is in Perth, 1,500 k away, which you'll see in the summer. People do not, so you really get silos. People do not want to come up from Perth. It's just too far, it's hot. I mentioned this place gets up to 47 degrees. Just don't want to come. But to have a proper pull planning session, I felt we needed to have the supervisors, so the decision makers, the managers, but also the project engineers and designers, and everybody needed to be in the room together. This is one we did. It's a very simple one, but this is quite interesting. Just the simple things. This was known scope of work for LNG1. But if we look at these diamonds, these are the hole points. These are inspections. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. 6 inspection hole points on a small scope of work. What people said, we hadn't realised it was that many inspections. So these are only about 2–3 hours. Inspector takes 2 or 3 hours, goes up to inspect the integrity of the pipes and they take the insulation off. But these are all home points. Because inspectors weren't available, it's just detrimental to the whole flow of the work. So what we did then, we had to use the milestones from the plan. We attempted to use the CPM, critical path, to even get a level 1 or 2. It just didn't work. An interesting outcome was we didn't initially agree a philosophy. So say, for instance, we were doing a lot of scope on the pipe racks. This is about 8 months' work, which is a more complex one we'll see at the end. First thing we said, we need to develop a philosophy. So how are we going to go about this work? In the past, when they're done, there are 3 levels. There's about 300 by 500 square meters. When they'd done them in the past, they went for the cherry picking. So they did the early work first. We're hitting, and this is where the earned value method is really detrimental, because people are on the S-curve straight away. They're doing really well straight away, but they're doing the wrong work. So what they decided after discussion was we'll start on the top, so it's 3 levels high, 20 metres in total. We'll start on the top, we'll scaffold out. That'll take us a week or 2 to get that going, and then we'll drop down and we'll cascade through. That was the philosophy of how we're going to do the work. We're going to start on the top, and we're going to work our way down, and this is why we do it, because we don't damage work that's been done already. It might seem simple, but... So we collaboratively develop a pull plan. When we finally got these pull planning meetings going, we had to get people up from Perth, so head offices. So we had to get the EPCM, everyone happy with the EPCM, engineering, procurement, contract managers, construction manager. We had to get their engineers who would never come up before. We had to get the client engineers up, but this was driven by the client engineers. They wanted to come. Project managers, site managers, as one of the site managers there. That's one of the site managers there. Get everybody in the room. But it was a big investment for these guys. So these guys wouldn't come until they felt there's going to be some payback on the investment. That's going to be the payback. We're going to develop a plan and schedule that works, that's got logic and that's got flow in it. And we're going to start cutting time out of these schedules. Because we're on a burning platform here. We need to get better, we need to improve. So we collaboratively develop a template. We went much more complex than that, but the work was quite repetitive. So you could develop a template of the work, look at the flow, look at the logic. The planners were in the room, and I felt initially they shouldn't be there, but actually they were very good. They wouldn't get involved in discussions. They were just watching and understanding. Because sometimes we're saying something like the INLEX, which is the instrumentation and electrical work, it says like the black arts. We don't understand how it goes, but if these guys are in the room, they can map out the flow of the work. So we developed a template, and then they'd populate their schedule from that. I said they would use the template to develop the schedule. This is the state we got to. We spent about 5 hours. We really should have spent, this is only part of it, we should have spent about 5 a day, and then this is going to be further workshopped. What I was looking was known scope and unknown scope. The unknown scope was CUI, which is corrosion under insulation. You don't know what's there until you go in, so you don't know what's there until you actually look. So it's very difficult to schedule that, but they worked out a system as to how they would use the known scope, unknown scope, how that would work together, how they do the scaffolding, how they do rope access. So really developing the schedule and use that to inform your planning and design. This is quite interesting. I use the last planner sheet too, because people talk about the use of the last planner and the use of lean as a method to learn and to knowledge manage. But I can't see where it happens that much. Probably does. So use the last planner sheet, and it took a long time to get this going. So we got all the guys in the room. We're having the last planner meeting. And you just say at the end, is there any good practice or bad practice on site that we want to record? And that's what they started doing. These are the inspectors. So they're picking up good practice and bad practice, and we use this for workshops to develop standard work designs. But again, you have to develop trust, and people have to really buy in to start doing this. This is, I can't even read that. This is quite interesting. As well as doing the pull planning, we use it as opportunity realization. There was a lot of explicit knowledge out there as opposed to tacit. As things that went wrong, and you'd hear the stories time and time again. For instance, one of them was the house had big issues. So we said we're going to off-site manufacture, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's brilliant! Lean is a great way to go." But the issue was they would off-site manufacture the cladding because you got all the pipes and interfaces, but it never fitted. And there's reasons for that. So this was excess work. This was actually bottlenecking instead of helping the work on. So just a discussion that said, okay, well, we need to fabricate on site. We'll get a pod to manufacture the gear. We'll have the interfaces manufactured off site, and we'll do it like that. Also, we'll lift the scaffold up using a Franna crane. We're not lifting it up by hand because they're lifted up by these Jenny wheels. And I'm saying it's great to see that in that medieval technology. You keep that alive. So these are the things. So you use these then to run workshops and then to start developing standard work approaches. Oh, you can see that. So this was interesting. This is how people will innovate themselves. So we had the daily huddle going, and we had some of the guys, some of the superintendents, they're English lads, who were really into the last planner. They understood planning. And then one morning, they've got their sheet at the daily huddle, the first one, I'm going, what's that sheet? And this is, oh, it's just something we produced. What we do is, because we've always got issues with knowing, if we don't have any work, if it drops out of the system, where the leading hands can go next. So what we do is we just identify what work areas we have, then any opportunistic work there may be. They develop this themselves. And I took it off them. This is just an example of the way innovation. So this is the way where we got to on the daily huddle, where the inspectors simplified it and then they look at opportunistic work that was in the last planner, but they could identify this work they could do if they couldn't get at what they were supposed to be getting at. So in conclusion, the successful implementation requires planning and discipline, and it requires real discipline. Also, use of a common message, and this was described, not having the people understanding what the terminology was and what it meant. Use of knowledge management to continually churn the knowledge that resides in the workforce and use that. So it's use it or lose it. We're not embedding lessons learned in the contracts. We're embedding lessons learned all the time, continuously. And especially engage middle managers. So the outcomes were, there was identification of champions for sustainable embedment. I didn't ask them. These guys came to me. It was 4 or 5. Some people were really passionate about the lean. Some of these guys could come here and they could give you a really passionate talk, probably more passionate than I could, on lean and how they engage with it. They could see the benefits of it, and that's when they could see the benefits. And there's about 4 people, some of the managers, some of the superintendents, who really wanted to get involved and who really wanted to carry it on. And there was positive and measurable outcomes, and you could see we're really tracking the PPCs. That was evidence. You could show, well, we're getting a trend on the PPC, 80%. This is the outcomes. This is the improvements we get. So thank you for listening. Questions? I need to go back.
So the mic is open for questions or comments. Yep.
I have a short question. I didn't get a sense of the huddle innovation. I wrote it down, the word, 1 second. Daily huddle innovation, though. I didn't get what you are doing with it.
So you know the daily huddle, it's used to, have you used the daily huddle?
No, never. Okay. It's completely
really?
new for me.
So the daily huddle is, if we look at the last planner, it's a last planner system. And a system is an interconnected, interrelated set of events, or activities, interdependent. So it's got three parts to it. If we look at the last planners, okay. So we look at the last planner, so the daily huddle is a day look ahead. So we're looking ahead at what we're going to do in the upcoming day. Also probably, I try to get them report what they did in the previous day, but that wouldn't fly. Then we've got the week look ahead, which is the last planner itself. You want to call it the last planner. So that's the crew-centric planning. And then we've got the pull planning, where we look at 4 months, 6 months, this time, 8 months. So the daily huddle was just, you get your supervisors, it's traditionally described, or is described as getting your supervisors, your last planners, on the work phase, and just have a quick 5-minute discussion of what they're going to do. The way this evolved is, it's always, I think it's usually discussed in terms of looking at your schedule. I'm probably wrong on that. But what they started doing was discussing quality. So you might get your QA, QC manager in, just drop in, this is the message for the day, guys. You do our ITPs or whatever. Whole points we need to address are the health and safety guys would drop in. And it was also a must-attend event for everybody, because shutdowns are really complex and things happen so fast and change. From hour to hour, they change. So if you went there, they're held twice a day. You got in there 5 minutes in the morning. You knew what was happening, where the gangs were, where the interfaces were, where the simultaneous operations were happening, who could help who was struggling. And I was at it. It's just a day look ahead. And as I said, the other benefit was getting people to the work phase on time, and exactly on time. So it's almost a pull system. So instead of telling people, I want you at the work phase at 7 o'clock, you just pull them in, you say, this meeting at 7, you need to be there. And that's what happened.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's a really good tool. I'm surprised you haven't. Really good, really powerful.
Yep, Arnaldo.
Good afternoon. My question is that, well, with daily huddle, basically you are measuring the performance or checking the performance every day in a daily basis of all the workers, right?
No.
No. I mean, you plan what you're going to do today, and tomorrow you check if you...
No, what we do is... So when the last planner session, we have the last planners in the room who are the decision makers, who are the people who are going to do the work. All we did was just a standard, who's populate what the activities are. I'm probably telling you what you know already. Who's responsible? Look at your constraints. So it's just the idea of constraint identification. In normal construction tradition, we assume everything is constraint free until we hit the brick walls. We're looking at the brick walls and removing those, identifying those before we go out and do the work. And then when we've identified and we know we've removed the constraints, sometimes they pick up on some constraints that they could deal with, material issues, QMI, this is QMI, the quality management. They need to get these people on the ground. Then people would commit to what days we're going to do the work. We try and align it to the schedule, but it is their plan and their, so we might say, for instance, this first activity, this is demolished duct. That's supposed to be done on Tuesday. Say, no, I can't do it on Tuesday, but we can do it on Wednesday, and go on like that. So it's really people committing to what they can achieve. When we report, so then, and I haven't done it properly here, so when we start the meeting on the next week, you see here the ticking in the boxes what they've done and what they haven't done, and they should report back on their progress. And this is what it said. It took a long time for people, because this is the goal in here. What are the reasons for non-performance? We need to find that, but it took a long period, and this is this idea of engagement, commitment and trust. Once you engage trust, people trust you, they will start populating then.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jenny?
Yes. When you were talking about how you were using the pool planning, and you said that it was difficult to get the different actors to come to the northern part of Australia due to the heat and all that. And then you said that the client engineer, is that the same as the client?
No, the client's their project engineer. So we look at the structure. So the client was the owner.
Okay, because that is... How is this? How did you work with the client in all of this? Was the client involved? And
the client sponsored the client sponsored the owner sponsored the implementation of Lean.
But how are they engaged in the process? I mean, because in the building, we need them to tell what they want.
No,
so what is the client's role here, and how do you handle the whole participation of the client?
It was tightly interrelated, so the client was involved in a lot of the early development of scope. So in the develop phase, it was select, develop, execute. So they would do the early development, because it's highly complex work. So they would do the early development of what was involved. And the engineers, the project engineers didn't just do the design, they were a project manager to a certain extent. They call them a project engineer, but they are really the project manager. So they'll look at the design, scheduling, procurement on high level, and then they'll hand that to the EPCM contractor. But it's tightly interrelated, because it all depends on, we're looking at shutdowns, so that's related to operations. We need this ISSOW, which is integrated safe system of work, so we have to get all the permitry in place, build the permits up. So it's a highly interrelated process. So you couldn't separate the client's project engineer out from the EPCM engineer. It's just the way they did it as well. It's not the best way, but that's the way it worked. Yeah, you take what you get, and you deal with what you get.
Any other comments? Yep. Steve?
I think somewhere in the middle of your presentation, you showed us the pie charts.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible to go back. Yeah.
Yep.
So tool time is the time where
spent at the actual workplace
where they produce
on
value.
the spanners. No, and that's a very interesting. I'm glad you made that point, because this is the perception that. So you would ask them, "What's your productivity?" and they would say 40% or 60%, but that's not productivity. The productivity is a factor of tool time plus the productivity experience in that tool time. So that's what I'm saying. We may have only 10% value added, but this is a concept that I find pretty difficult to get their heads around. There may be 40%, sometimes it goes 60%. Actually, implementing the lean, we got 70 or 80%. But that's not the question. The question is, how effective are you in producing flow, doing the work you should be doing, adding value in that available space of time you have at the work front? And that was an interesting distinction, an interesting thought process. Tool time wasn't production.
This to the right, the chart to the right, was it measured?
Yeah, that was
at your project.
That was my project. That was so. What we had was a lot of consultants, and got loads of graphs, doing time and motion studies.
Yeah.
So I just want to do a like for like comparison. LNG1, the work I did was the pre-shut work. This is actually the shutdown work itself. The reason I couldn't go near the shutdown work was because we had our consultant friends in there doing their thing, which was an interesting way of doing a comparison between, okay, we got consultants, so how can you compare what consultants, which have a very command and control approach, a very tayloristic view, what's the difference with lean? There's only one person doing it, and a whole raft of people using a much more tayloristic command and control approach. So that was quite interesting. It wasn't meant to be part of the study, but it was quite an interesting comparison. And how do people engage with these guys? If you're telling somebody what to do, will people engage with that?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry. Looks like there are no more questions or comments. Nope. Let's give Vince a big hand.
Okay.
Thank you.